name is a pun on a word processor, like the old computers you would use for just typing, but it's so old now that nobody gets the pun. So we do process Wort, so close enough. Um, I don't know what else to say about the club at the moment. We have about 100 members, and so 18 people. This is more or less our typical meeting turnout. People in the club are spread out all over the metro area. So like I'm in Somerville, we have people in Cambridge, we have people in Medford, we've got people all the way out west as far as Concord and even maybe further, and North Shore. So kind of like the whole northern and western quadrant of Boston really represented here, and maybe a few people from south of the river. I don't know, but they're in the minority. So yeah, so Jacob, why don't you tell us about you and Buck Farms, and we can drop into the presentation. And thanks so much for doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you guys inviting me on. I'm always excited to talk malt. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about farming. So, but yeah, to get started, I guess I do have a presentation with slides, pictures, videos, a little bit of everything on it. So we are founded on a multi-generational family farm in northern Maine. And malting is kind of a new venture for us. We've always grown grain and potatoes. And just within the last 5 or 6 years, we started to actually get into the value added aspect and started processing that barley, which is already being grown for malt, just being sent to Canada Malting Company. So I'll go ahead and pull up what I have. You guys all see that?
Yep.
Okay.
Good.
Cool. So yeah, like I was saying, we are the Maine Malt House, so we have the value added aspect of it. But we also are a farm, now only focusing on grain. We are supplying our malt house, but we are also rely on a couple thousand acres from other farmers to help supply our malt house. So we outgrew what we could grow on our own farm within the first couple of years, just with the demand. So to really get into it, as you guys all know, every beer that you brew, it has a story. It has something that's unique to it, something that you like to tell people about. So I really hope by the end of this conversation or by the end of this presentation that I can give you something or impart something on you that adds to your story, hoping that you can take what you learned from this and attribute to your story when you guys brew with our grains. So picture it as a New England style IPA, brewed exclusively with Maine malt. This is actually a substance ale at Bissell Brother. It's one of the larger ones that features all Maine products in it, so it's very rarely touted. So what we'll cover today, I'm going to start by giving you guys a kind of laydown on our family farm and then the malt history. I do want to spend some time going through the grain farming aspect. I feel like that's kind of under-respected part of the process, even though it's a large part of the process. And then we'll move into through the malt house. And then hopefully I can cover all that in about 20-25 minutes, and then that'll leave a few minutes for questions at the end. So to get started, back in 1960s, my grandfather graduated high school and did what nobody does these days. He went and bought a tractor and 40 acres instead of going to college, and he started farming potatoes. Back then, there was a pretty big market for potatoes in Maine. We were actually the largest potato growing state in the country. We had about 200,000 acres in Aroostook County that were all going for potatoes. That's really the bread and the butter of our operation. Up and through, even within the past 10 years, we were exclusively potatoes. More recently, there had been some shifts in the industry, given the Canadian dollar and our frequency to the Canadian border. And so that kind of led us personally to kind of shift our thoughts more onto the grain side of things and away from potatoes. But potatoes are can't be grown on the same ground every year. You'll deplete the soil. So the grains are vital to that rotation. Everybody up here, for growing potatoes, they need some type of grain product on their ground for 2 or 3 years in between the potatoes. So it's just an essential part of the process. But that was all traditionally going for feed and lower value products elsewhere. So my grandfather, when he started, and this is him back in the 70s, he's actually loading a potato planter. And he started, he was just doing potatoes and oats. So oats was the only thing that there was a market for back then. So that's all you grew was potato and oats. Nowadays, we grow barley, canola, soybeans, wheat, sunflowers, peas. So we cover a broad spectrum. We also do mustard, and we trial things every year just to see if something sticks. This isn't about potatoes, but I mean, potatoes is a big part of northern Maine. So I thought I'd just show you a few pictures here of what the potato operation actually looks like up here. So down here in the lower corner, you can see that's a planter nowadays. So you just saw what it looked like back in the 70s. This is what it looks like now. He's filling it up, getting ready to go through. Up in the top corner, that's harvest. And so there's two machines setting the potatoes over, and then one machine harvesting it. And then they were bringing in a potato house. And the last picture down in the corner, that's actually 6 million pounds of potatoes stuck in that building right there. That's one of our old potato facilities. But I don't want to spend too much time on that, but I just wanted to share that little tidbit here. So the history of the Maine Malt House. So back when I was still in college, my family and I were trying to figure out a way to diversify the farm. The potato markets weren't in the best spot at that point, and how do you bring another generation onto a family farm that's already multi-generational? And so we really turned to hops initially, and that's kind of where we started putting all of our time and energy. And we're going to put up an acre of hops, and we managed a half an acre the first year. And as we were out trying to sell those, we stumbled upon the fact that people also grew with barley in it. At that time, we knew nothing about the process or anything. So it's kind of like an eye-opening moment. Like, wait a minute, you guys use barley. We grow barley. Like, how can we get this into your brewery? And so then that just kind of put us on that road of trying to learn the science behind it, figure out what we needed for equipment. So within a year, we'd converted an old potato storage into a grain facility, which I'll show you pictures of. That took about a year to get through that, and then we started our production in the winter of 2015. So that's the history side of it. So now I'm going to walk you through the grain growing side of it. I'm going to give a little technical just so you guys have an understanding of some of the intricacies that go into growing grain, but I hope I don't get too detailed to the point where I bore you. And if I do, just please let me know. But to start out with growing grains, I put that quote on here: great malt comes from great barley. You can't make great malt from poor quality barley. So you have to start with the fundamentals. So that's why it's such an important piece of this whole process of making good quality beer. You can't make poor quality or great quality beer with poor quality malt, which comes from poor quality barley. So number one fundamental point here is that you've got to start with the great barley. And it's a challenge because in the brew house you can control your temperatures, you control certain things. You can't control Mother Nature, so you've got to try to find ways around that to not control but be prepared to deal with what Mother Nature deals you. So one of the big things you can do is shop for the right variety for your growing region. So when we're picking varieties, we're looking at what the end customer wants, but we're also looking for varieties that are resistant to diseases, resistant to sprout damage, something that's going to yield high, something, of course, that's going to malt well. And then moving along, we look at the seeding rate. So when we're planting, and this is a grain planter here, when we're planting, we're putting 1.3 million seeds per acre. So we want 1.3 million plants per acre. And we find that that's the ideal population. Not, you don't get overgrowth where you get inconsistencies, and you don't get undergrowth, which allows for weed development. And then also seed depth is important. You don't want to put it too far down where it starts to digest itself before it can actually photosynthesize. You want it to be pretty shallow, but you don't want it to be so shallow that it's exposed and it might never grow. And then lastly, the nitrogen rate and how this impacts the beer. Too much nitrogen causes too much protein, causes a reduced extracts. Even though it gives you a better enzyme package, you reduce the efficiency in the brew house. So that's a really important aspect in growing malt barley, and one of the things that's often overlooked. So I'm sure a lot of you guys already know a lot of this stuff, but I just want to make sure I do cover everything just to be thorough.
Yeah, no, this is great, man.
Okay, perfect. So the two main varieties that are grown in the United States are 2-row and 6-row. So 2-row is what you see mostly for craft malt. It's what you see for craft breweries. Where the 6-row, you're gonna see that more used in the commercial breweries where they're using more adjuncts. And the reason for that is because it does naturally have a higher protein content, which gives you a bigger enzyme package essentially to convert that corn syrup, the corn starches, the rice starches. So whereas in 2-row, you don't need that enzyme package. You're not brewing with that many adjuncts to the point where it really matters. And 2-row is more of a premium anyway with a lower protein content, which allows for higher extracts. Through the growing season, it's a 90-day on most barley varieties. In our region, spring varieties work well, so we plant them in May to June, and then from there through August to September, depending on when that plant day, about 90 to 95 days, we'll be harvesting them. So you can see this first picture, the top picture is maybe 2 to 3 weeks after planting. We have good emergence there. And then the bottom one is actually when it's tillering, the heads are emerging through the plant at that point. So you're starting to finally see your yield development. That picture is still probably, about 3-4 weeks away from ripening off. So still got a little ways to go. So harvest is we usually begin around the 15th or the 20th of August. Things to consider when you're going out to harvest your grain. The biggest one is moisture. If long-term storage, you got to have the right moisture. In our case, it's 13.5%. Can't take anything lower than that, but we can bring it in to dry it. So sometimes we'll cut as high as 18% moisture and then run it through a grain dryer. But it has to be at 13.5 or less to store for long term. The other big problem with barley is pre-harvest sprout damage, PHS. Barley is bred to germinate rapidly. So that's the point in the malt house is that it needs to germinate rapidly. You want a short window of germination to get full modification. So that causes these grains to be what they call hot. And when it's hot, when it's ready in the field, and you get a rain shower, that grain can start to sprout on the stalk, and that causes a lot of issues. Mostly, you might not notice it for the first 3 months, but you'd be testing your tank, the germination in your tank over the spring, and then one day you test it and all your grain's dead. That's not good. A lot of commercial malt houses have run into that issue back before they knew what it was. You just malt in this tank, and then one day you try to malt it and nothing sprouts, and now you have a tank worth of feed barley. Those two are the big ones. Other than that, ripeness, of course, you want even golden color throughout. That usually follows in suit with moisture. And then you want a nice bright color. The longer you let it set in the field, usually the darker the kernel gets. And the visual aspect is important when it's in the brew house too. So here's a video of actually harvest on our farm, and here he's cutting about 2.5 miles an hour, maybe 3. You can see his tanks getting full on the top, and so we're just unloading. He's probably got 9 ton worth of grain in there, about 18 ton fit on a truck, so he'll fill twice in the combine and empty it onto this truck.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, we decided it was time to get a drone. So finally got some good shots this year.
Did you guys hire somebody to do the drone shots, or did you get your own drone?
We got our own drone.
That's cool. That's cool.
Yeah, this was a week after this was taken. I flew it into the front tire of the combine though. She ran over it. Didn't survive that one.
Classic.
Yeah. So once the grain's harvested, we bring it back to the malt house. So this is an overview of the malt house, and you can see the big tanks on the back row. That's barley storage for malting. The other bins hold mostly wheat, but we also do sunflowers for birdseed, and we do oats as well for rye. So when we're bringing it in, if it comes above 13.5%, we have to dry it down. You can't see the dryer; it's right in the middle of all those tanks. But we'll basically feed it through the dryer, get the moisture out of it, and then move it to the tank that it's going in. Each one of these bins in the back row holds about 400 tons worth of grain. That would be probably like 280 to 300 acres worth in perspective. Each one of those bins holds about 400, about 300 acres worth of grain, of grain. So 400 ton of barley. So this is kind of what we're looking at when it's coming in. A lot of this is pretty hard to test on the spot. But we can check moisture and test away easy enough. We do run it through screens to check, make sure we don't have too many thins. Germination capacity, that's mostly a chit test. So we actually test to see how soft the endosperm on the kernel is. And if it has a soft endosperm, we know that it started to sprout in the field. This year, of course, with the drought, we didn't have to worry about that at all. And then the other big one's protein. And protein definitely impacts the grain as far as extracts go. So moving into the building, before we can actually use this grain to process it, it first has to be cleaned. So it's not, the combine does a great job thrashing, but you still get some chaff, you get straw pieces, you still have beards on the kernels. So first we start off by running it through a rotary machine called a debearder, and that mashes the grain up. The beards that grow on the grain, you see it in the pictures, it's the hairy things that's still attached a lot of times. I'll show you that in the next slide. So that helps kind of like thrash all that off, polish the kernel up, and then we run it through a sorting machine. So we're sizing this grain over a 5.5 of a 64th of an inch screen to try to get the most consistent barley as possible so that it germinates as consistently as possible. A smaller kernel germinates a lot quicker. It has a lot quicker water uptake than a larger kernel. And that can cause lower efficiencies in the malt house and in the brew house. So it's very important to get all the kernels as consistently sized as possible before process. So we're running it through that. And then for our floor malting system, we put it into a super sack and haul it into the floor malt room. On our larger saladine box, I'll show you. We're putting it onto a truck, running it around, putting it into a tank out back that feeds our big system. So this is what it looks like before and after. So you can see how much it polishes it up. The beards you can see on the side here, that those all disappear, as well as a straw and anything else that's in there that we don't want. So it does do a good job getting it to a point where it's ready to go into the malt house. So before we really get into the malt process, I figured I'd start with what is malt. And I'm sure a lot of you already know this, but just to go through the basics of it, malt is a grain that's been modified to make it more usable in the brew house. So if you were to try to use barley without malt in it, you would end up with a porridge. So that grain would swell up, but you wouldn't actually be able to pull anything off of it. You wouldn't get the efficiency, the extract that you need. It just hasn't been put in the right state. The enzymes aren't there to encourage that breakdown inside the kernel. And I'll explain that to you as we go on. But and of course, why is it important? Because it provides that alcohol content, you provide the mouthfeel, the head and the head retention, the flavor, and importantly, the color. So through the process, we're looking to soften the grain so it goes through the mill easy. We're activating starch degrading enzymes. We're activating other enzymes in there that are breaking down cell walls to get it in a usable form. And then at the end, we're creating the desired flavors and the colors in the kilning process. So the malting process consists of 3 main steps: steeping, germination, and kilning. And the steeping step, you're just trying to get that grain to grow. So you're trying to get it to do what it naturally wants to do, which is to grow. So you slowly raise the moisture up. You can't just hold it underwater because you'll drown it. So you have to go through a number of wet, dry immersions, pulling CO2 off when it's dry, keeping that as lively as possible. And you slowly get up over 2 days to about 45%. And that's really where it wants to take off. So once you hit that 45% mark, it's time to put it on the floor or into the saladine box. In this case, I'm showing you the floor. And there it's going to stay for 4 days. You're going to germinate it. This is where the biochemistry happens, where it starts to digest internally. It starts to break down protein chains. Enzymes are becoming active. All the desired things are happening through those 4 days until you get to the right point of modification, and then it goes into the kiln. And you want to halt all that bio activity and make sure that it's at a low enough moisture where it's shelf stable for as long as possible. So in the steep tank, and this is roughly what a steep tank looks like. I mean, ours is a little bit different, but you'll get the point anyway. So you're filling it with grain and water initially. This first fill works great as a pre-cleaner. You're gonna overflow water for 20 minutes maybe. That's gonna clean any dust and particulate that flows off of the grain. So you're gonna end up with a real nice clean product. Usually with barley, we let it sit wet for about 8 hours and then we'll dry it for an extended period of time. And when it's sitting dry is really when it's taking that water up, because it's actually, you're allowing that grain to breathe and it starts its own respiratory process. When it starts the process, that's when it sucks the surface film off of that kernel and takes that water out. And so it'll go through several of these cycles to get up to the desired moisture. So like I said, up to 45%, and we're providing the aeration. I guess I went through all of this. So once you get to the 45%, it's coming out. That's when you're activating something called gibberellic acid, which secretes through the whole kernel. And that is really like the lubrication that starts the whole thing. And that allows all of your proteins to break down. That's when you release alpha amylase, beta glucanase. That's when you start breaking down the cell walls. So if you want to picture, I'm sure you all know what beta glucan is and how it impacts your process. So our job to successfully malt this is we need to get rid of that beta glucan. So think of the beta glucan as an envelope, and then you have your starch granulars in that envelope. So if you were to brew without breaking that down, those starch granulars are just going to swell up in that envelope. You're not going to take it out of the envelope. Our job is to break down that envelope. We want to tear that open for you. And so through this process, we're activating beta glucanase. And over time, over 4 days, that beta glucanase will digest the cell wall and make those starch granulars available for you. And at the same time, we're also activating that alpha amylase that you guys look forward to when you hit 150 strike temp. That wakes that up, and that process starts all over again. You guys pick up where we leave off. So you guys are just taking it and carrying it from what we already started. So to judge germination, to judge how well modified it is, we actually use a visual indicator, which is the acre spire. So you can see in this image here, the acre spire starts at one end of the kernel and it grows up and around under the husk. So a good indication for us of when we're getting to that point where the cell walls are broken down, where your alpha amylase, your DP is where you want it to be, is that acre spire growth is going to reach the end of that kernel. So we're trying to measure between 3/4 and full length of that kernel. Once most of our samples reach that point, that's when we know it's time to stop it. You start to go past that, the acre spire actually starts to turn green. That's when it's internally digesting itself. So you're going to lose extract if you go too far over. It'll use all of that trying to actually grow the plant as it naturally wants to do. During this time when this is growing, you can also see there's rootlets coming off of it. And if you don't rake it, those rootlets will become entangled. It causes heat, matting, and the more heat that it generates, the quicker it grows, and then eventually it can get out of hand. And we've had batches sometimes get up over 120 degrees. And at that point, you have lactic bacteria developing, and you basically ended up with acidulated malt at the end of it. So you try not to let that happen.
Can you guys sell that as acidulated malt?
Probably we could, but you guys aren't using too much acidulated malt. So take a while to get through it. So this is what happy barley looks like. This is probably day 2 of germination when it's really getting momentum. It's nice, bright white. It's still got 2 days to go. It does darken a little bit as you get to the end of it. It starts to run out of energy, but so in the kiln, and once you do get to that point, the acre spire is where you want it to be. It's time to dry it. So you put it into a kiln. It's going to be here for 24 hours. You're going through several stages to get rid of the freestanding water. You don't want to go too hot too quick, because you can do just like a steak. You can sear that water in there, and then it's really hard to get out. So you got to go low and slow at first. You also don't want to go too hot, because then you start to kill that alpha amylase that you worked so hard to develop. So once you get over 130, that's when you can start to see your diastatic power drop. So most of the drying happens at 130. You want to create more flavorful grains. You try to hit that temperature, and I'll show you guys a chart with it, but you try to hit that temperature that you're hitting in the brew house where saccharification happens. So if you do build a little bit of sugar in this process, you can use that to allow a little bit of crystallization going on. It builds a little color and more flavor. So the Vienna malt, you actually allow it to sit at 150 for an extended period of time. And that allows that development, the saccharification, and then you go into the kiln, and that gives you a little bit more color and a lot more of that sweet malty flavor. But yeah, the 3 phases I just mentioned, the free drying, you're going low and slow, you got high fan speed though. This takes a while. I mean, you spend the majority of your time here, but this is the most economical point, because once you get to that cure and you're going high temperature, but to get from that 12% down to that 4%, that takes up most of your energy. So this is what a kiln trend looks like for our pale malt. So you can see that we're spending a fair amount of time at the 130. You're getting 45 probably down to maybe 20% in that 130 degree, which is the top line. And then we're stepping it up to 150. So notice when we're hitting it with 130, the actual temperature coming off that grain is only about 75 degrees. And that's because your heat is being lost in the form of water evaporation, so evaporated coolant. So a good way to know when you hit that 12%, the equilibrium point, is when your air on and your air applied temperature and your air off temperature are touching, which you can see happens towards the end. So we hit at 150, that helps develop those precursors that I was telling you about to build the flavor and to build the color. So we hold that for an extended period of time, and then you hit the cure stage for at least 3 to 4 hours, and that gets rid of any DMS issues that you might have. So if you have a malt that has DMS issues, you can lend that to not being cured for long enough to fully get rid of that. So I'll show you now that I'll just show you some pictures of our 2 different systems. We started out on a 4 malting system. I didn't get a picture of the actual steep vessel for this one, but so this is a 2-ton batch size. It's in the tank for 2 days. We spread it out on the floor, 4 to 6 inches thick. By the end of it, it's like 8 to 10 inches thick because it fluffs up so much as it grows. And it's there for 4 days until we shovel it up, and then we put it into a kiln unit. And we have this designed for easy unload, so we're able to just pull a tub out the forklift and dump it. And then it has to be re-cleaned afterwards to get all your growth off of it. If you don't want that, that's about 25% protein, which would give you a lot of unwanted haze. So that's a small system. Our larger system, this is the inside of the steep vessel. This holds about 11 tons of barley. This one is pumped wet, so we don't actually cast out dry. We actually move it as a sluice, and we pump it into a saladine box. This is more what you'd see at a commercial facility. This was actually designed by a commercial malt designer, and they just took that and scaled it down quite a bit to fit our size. So this grain, rather than being 4 to 6 inches, this is sitting about 3.5 feet deep. And then to control our temperature at this, we're able to constantly move air through it, which is a game changer. And that really helps with consistency. And then compared to the other smaller system where we were shoveling it up and putting it into a bin to dry it, this dries in the same unit. So the fans are constantly running through the heating units. And when we decide it's time to turn those heating units on, we set it in the computer to fire, and it just runs right through that. So this will spend 5 days here. It has a false floor on it. So once it's done, you drop the floor out of it and it augers it back to our cleaning line. So we'll go back through the same cleaning setup, get rid of all those combs on there, polish the kernel back up, and we'll either go 50 pounds super sack, or we'll ship it in bulk chocolates as shown on the scales. In addition to this, we also just started steam flaking. I'm sure you guys are quite familiar with flakes, but our process, it varies from facility to facility. Some commercial guys are still using steam, some use infrared heaters. In the steam process, we're running the grain through a steam chamber. It takes about 30 minutes to go top to bottom on this chamber while being induced with steam. From there, once it's gelatinized, we're running it through what's called a smear roller. And in this case, the rollers are actually turning at 2 different rates, just slightly variance. And that allows the grain to kind of smear open. That gives you more surface area. It just makes it break down a lot quicker when it's in the brew kettle or in the mash tun. And then after flaking, the grain back up to like 20% moisture, and you got to get it down to 4% for stability. So we don't offer currently a full range of grains. We're mostly on the pale side and the specialty grain side. To get into the, the caramels and the crystals and the roasted takes a lot of different equipment, which at our scale is not quite feasible, given the amount that brewers actually use. But I just wanted to throw this up there just to explain basically that in a kiln you usually can get up to like a Vienna. You can do a Munich 10. You might be able to do a Munich 30 depending on how hot you can get your system. Pale ale malts, but anything beyond that, like a crystal, the caramel malts, all of those are done in a roaster where they're actually being turned, and those are typically pretty small batches. Even in a commercial facility, they're only doing 5-ton batch size, just mostly because of the volume, but also because you're working with high temperatures and the smallest variance in unloading. If it takes you too long to unload to cool down, you're going to end up with a completely different product. These are the actual the products that we offer. The pale through the Pilsner. We run red and white wheat, oat malt, and rye malt, and then we also offer the full line of flakes. We are working on the Vienna and the Munich and the Pale Ale, just trying to get some software upgrades in the system to get those in, but where we at right now. So that's all I have for you guys. Willing to answer any questions you might have.
So I definitely have
That was great.
a couple of questions.
Sure.
Thank you. Yeah, that was good stuff.
I'll kick it off. Did you go to school for this, or did you just pick all this up from like family farming in general?
I learned most of it myself. My brother actually went to Winnipeg and did a malting course. I just read a lot of books on it. We still learn something every day. It's constant, just like brewing. You're always learning. There's always something to try, something to change. So yeah, mostly self-taught.
What's the water that you use? What's the source? And do you monitor the pH that you soak your grains with or anything like that?
No, we don't monitor pH. It's all coming from a well. We actually put holding tanks in to help bring our temperatures more into range. So we run into an issue in the wintertime where you're running about 10 to 15 degrees colder water, and that slows down your water uptake. So you'd actually have to extend your steep time. And to overcome that, we put holding bins in that we keep water inside to help temper it.
As you've been going through this learning process, and this is something brewers do a lot, is we'll do an experiment. We'll try same recipe, different grains, or same recipe, different hops, whatever. Have you done any interesting experiments either, in the malt house or even earlier on the farm to I'm interested in kind of how do you choose the varieties, the nitrogen rates, the seeding rates, and then other things in the malt house too. What kind of things have you tried and what effects have they had?
Sure. On the farm side, the variety one's a big one, and that's one that we're constantly looking at. We have been doing variety trials where we'll grow 10 acres of different varieties. Trying to find one that might yield better, yield better in the field and in the brew house, but still can malt as well as Dewdale, which is the variety that we use. Dewdale we chose because it's actually the malt, the barley of choice for Canada malting. They kind of picked that grain for our region, but it's starting to get a little antiquated. It's an old variety. It's about 20 years old. I think Canada Malt might even be looking for something new. So at the same time, we're looking to see if there's anything that we can come up with. It's tricky though, because it's not something that you can try and then 2 weeks later you get feedback on. I mean, we're waiting a year and a half for results, and then things change within that. There might be a new variety it's a really tough one. That's one that we've been struggling with. I guess for the rest of the field, nitrogen you play with every year. Nitrogen's hard because it's also dependent on your rainfall. So this year we cut our nitrogen in half. But it wouldn't have mattered how much nitrogen we put on because we didn't. We got our entire 90-day growing season. I don't think we got a half an inch of water. so it wouldn't have saturated into the ground. So basically, we put that on top, and then nothing happened with it because there's nothing to pull it into the soil. So that one's also very challenging. We make our best guess based off of research from the university. Moving into the malt house, that's a lot of trial and error, a lot of batches that haven't made spec. Especially on our larger system, we do have a lot more computer controls and a lot better feedback system. So we can constantly look at the result of, running 185 rather than 180. What happens if you hit it with water while it's germinating? I mean, what happens if you add an hour to the steep cycle? So you constantly get information on that and how it impacts your analysis. So there's constant feedback there.
On the subject of experiments, do you do any brewing based analysis? I mean, I saw the analysis of protein, moisture, and stuff like that. Do you ever try brewing beers with your grains to see how they carry through the whole process, or is that unnecessary with the kind of analysis you already do?
We actually work with Allagash on that, since they already have a pretty well developed lab, and they also have a well developed tasting panel. So
Nice.
especially when we're doing the variety analysis, so we'll malt each different variety, and then we'll send it through their tasting panel to see what happens. We actually have one going through right now. So we're waiting on the feedback for that to see, are we going to put in a couple 100 acres of this variety next year? So we do have a little 1 barrel that we're going to put in here for that purpose of testing in-house, and of course, because we like to drink beer. So, but we haven't got that installed yet. So.
Cool. Well, if you got Allagash helping you out, I mean, that's, hard to do worse.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Nice.
So when you guys are pulling the grain out and you're cleaning it off and doing all that, what do you guys do with all that extra shit? I mean, like, you got a vat, you're like cleaning it all out, and like, where does all that go?
Yes. Yeah, there's a guy that comes locally and picks it all up, and he spreads it in his cow pen, and they just pick through it.
Really?
Actually, when you clean off the rootlets after malting, it's 25% protein. So that's a good protein source.
That's good eating.
Yeah, and it's actually a lot of guys, they can feed it to grass-fed cattle to finish them off at a higher protein, because it's essentially a grass product or a field product.
Okay.
So that you see a lot of that too.
On
You
the farm,
mentioned, oh, go ahead.
on the farming end of things, you mentioned how you can't do the potatoes 2 years in a row. Do you need to rotate through, or can you continually plant barley year after year?
That was totally my question.
That is a good question though. You can get away with it for a year or two. Like, we've gone barley, and you see the same exact thing, but over time you will deplete that nutrients. It is possible to add that nutrient back in, but we usually like to split it up with either pea crop or sunflowers, or we'll try to go into other people's rotations. I think this year we're going to put broccoli on some land, which has great residual nitrogen. So we'll be able to pick that up for the following year.
What was that for nitrogen?
Broccoli.
Oh, cool.
Broccoli is nitrogen fixing?
I didn't know that.
Wow.
Grow that between your hops. Awesome.
And then you mentioned that you need the rest of the grain for it to germinate. Does it need to be cold stratified like some seeds, or just needs a rest time?
For dormancy?
Yeah.
That's a variety dependent. So like the variety we're using now, like I said, it's hot, and which means that we can take it out of the field and grow it in a steep tank and it'll go. European style varieties are typically bred for dormancy. So that there you'll see that you gotta hold on to it through a cold month, really hit it with that cold weather, and then usually can break that dormancy. So it's usually about January before you start malting bringing the European varieties through the malt facility.
And have have you or anybody brewed a beer with only your grain and only your hops?
We gave up on the hops pretty quick.
Uh,
There was at one time, but hops are a pain. Very labor intensive. Actually, yeah, Mapleton had 200 acres of hops at one time. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with Crosby hops out west, but to put that in perspective, their farm's 275 acres. So we had that here, but Danny mildew moved in and kind of swept it out.
Yeah, I was wondering if it was blight, like in New York.
Yeah, same thing, same time probably. You still see it growing in the ditches here and there, but
Can't get rid of it.
no, you can't.
All right, couple more questions, or we're getting up on an hour of Jacob's time. So anybody else?
Well,
Random
mean,
question.
what-
I always see these pictures of people like raking the floor malt, and everything. Are you fucking up the malt when you walk around on it?
No, not at all. It's actually pretty gentle on it.
Really? It doesn't like crush anything?
No, it take a lot actually to crush a kernel, especially when you get a mat of it.
Okay.
Barley's pretty safe anyway. It's usually when you get to the stuff that doesn't have a husk on it, like wheat or rye. That'll damage a lot easier, but as long as you have a good 4 to 6 inches, if it was an inch, you'd probably damage it a lot easier. You're just rolling it on that concrete. As long as you have good cushion, then yeah, we never had an issue.
What were some things that really went wrong when you were first starting out, or maybe just like surprising lessons that you learned along the way?
Well, good question. We got pretty fortunate. Our first batch made malt quality, but we didn't know how. We didn't know why. So it took us quite a while before we actually put it out to market because we want to know, how easy is it to go wrong. I guess in that sense, we were pretty fortunate. And then we haven't had any big catastrophic events. We had a little family fallout this year. That was probably the most catastrophic thing. But my brothers and I stepped up and bought the entire operation. So, and in order to keep it going, we haven't had, fortunately, too many challenges. I think this year might be the biggest one because the drought caused a severe shortage in barley. And that barley protein spiked to about 14%. Our range is usually 11% or under. So it's pretty tough. Luckily, we had enough in the tank from last year, so to kind of protect ourselves from this, we kind of rid up our own insurance plan by trying to store 2 years of grain on hand at all times in case Mother Nature continue the nuts. And this year it did. So as long as we don't have 2 years back to back, we should be all set. But a little bit nerve wracking because I don't really want to malt 2020 barley, and I hope we don't need to.
So in that case, it just goes to feed or other products?
It all gets sold to feed, yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, one other question I had before we go is it possible for us to buy your malt? Are you distributing to any homebrew vendors or small scale companies, or is there like a big distributor we could hit up?
No, I mean, I can definitely work on shipping of some sort. I can try to figure that out. We don't go to homebrew stores because they don't take a pallet. They like hand carry, and I mean, we're 4 hours away from the population, so it's pretty hard for us to hand carry, 5 bags. But I'll try to find any means possible to get it down to you. Actually, if I mean, our minimum order for flat rate shipping to a commercial spot is 10 bags. So I mean, if you can pull together a 10 bag order, we could ship it down to you for $75.
We do that all the time.
So yeah, DT, you want to announce what we're going to do then?
Yeah, so I think we'd like to work. We want to work with you guys and do like a group buy.
Okay.
In general, the club, we've done a couple of local malters, right? And yeah, we usually swing like a pallet If people haven't bought in a long time, sometimes it goes 2 pallets. But the idea being that we'll not only do the group buy, but then we'll choose somebody in the meeting tonight, and you'll get like a free sack on the club that we'll put in for.
Yeah, we'll touch base with you, Jacob, after this and set that up, but we'll get it together for probably delivery in January or something like that.
That sounds great, and I'll throw my email, my phone number here, so if anybody wants to call me, has any questions or whatnot, you guys can get a hold of me.
Yeah, we have a commercial spot too. We can do the drop at.
Sounds good. Yeah, I threw my my information up there. So if anybody has any follow-up questions or just wants to talk malt, talk anything, actually, give me a call.
I got two random questions. All right. Is your oat malt, is it like long and skinny? Like all the oat malt I bought like
Sounds like a
oat
personal
malt,
question.
and it's like
Yeah, this is getting a little personal.
But it makes it's like a pain in the ass to mill because I have to reset my mill just for that grain.
Where are you getting it from? Is it coming from Thomas Fawcett?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, no, oat by nature is pretty long and skinny. And it's 40% husk by weight. You're dealing with a pretty husky grain. There's not a ton underneath that husk anyway. There are some varieties that are skinnier than others. I do have a Thomas Fawcett sample here, but I don't know what ours compares to what it looks like side by side. It's the first I've heard of that issue.
I only know because I tried to brew 100% oat malt beer, and it was a pain in the ass to mill. I mean, and then it was because it's all husk. It was like super frothy and.
Right.
Yeah.
It filtered good though, I bet.
What's that?
I said it filtered good though, I bet.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. All right. One more random question. Your potatoes.
Sure.
Do you sell like the potato straight, or do you like make flour out of it? Or because I know Holy Donut uses potato flour.
So this is the first year we haven't grown potatoes. We decided to kind of just put everything in the grain and increase our acreage there. Before though, we were growing for seed market. Our potatoes were going anywhere from Florida to New York, and they bring in the potato and they act like the eyes on the potatoes. That's where the root grows out of. You've held it in the cupboard for too long. You've seen that happen anyway. Yep. So they'll cut that at wherever we send it. They'll cut that seed piece so they get 2 eyes per seed piece, and they put that into the ground to grow another plant. So we're growing early generation seed, stuff that had been bred within the last 2 to 3 years, and we're just growing that out for tip guys.
Gotcha. All right. Any more questions from anybody?
All right. I think we've taken enough of his time. But thank you so much for coming to talk to us. It was really cool to see. Enjoyed the pictures and videos and everything.
That was a lot of great information.
And if you guys ever have any questions or anything, follow up with me.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, nice guys. See ya.
Wonders of Zoom. Thank you.
A lot.
Okay. So we can stop recording after this and go to club business.